Military analyst Sean Bell joins us in the studio. Thank you so much.
Hi, Rosie.
We're hearing, that the comments that are coming out of the US, how Israel are responding. They are preparing for retaliation. What do you think that retaliation might look like?
Well, first of all, we're talking about an event that happened on the 1st of April, a strike on the consulate that took out 13 people, including one of the Iranian senior commanders. So Israel must have expected there was going to be some sort of retaliation to that. What's been interesting is Iran is traditionally quite measured. It doesn't rush in to make a response. It's measured about that. There's lots of options it could take. But if you look back in 2020, that's probably the last example when America killed one of Iran's top commanders, Qasem Soleimani. Again, a measured response. Then suddenly 12 ballistic missiles were launched at 2 US bases in Iraq. But there was a phone call first to warn the Americans, and actually there were no lives lost. Part of this is about Iran saving face with its neighbours, but it will not want to go to war with Israel or the US for all sorts of reasons.
And as you rightly say, it will be measured. And, of course, Iran works through its proxies, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So in this case, and looking back on the 1st of April, they did say at that time, Israel will regret this crime. Israel must be punished. So we've had all of these days that have passed. And, of course, Israel must be expecting something. Biden actually coming out and saying, do not attack Israel, is very strong. He also talks about ironclad support as well. So with one hand, he says one thing, then he says something quite different. But the US also gearing up to support Israel. And many of our commentators this morning are saying exactly what you're saying, is the last thing Iran needs is war, all-out war with Israel.
Yes, and I think the bottom line for all of this is that Iran is not the most powerful military force in the region, and therefore, if it was to go to war with Israel and the US, it would suffer badly. But it needs to maintain its reputation. From a military perspective, the one thing that Iran wants to protect is its fledgling nuclear programme. There's lots of allegations about how far it's progressed. They will not want to give the US licence to go and attack that, because once Iran, not if, but when Iran gets nuclear weapons on its current path, that will be the ultimate deterrence against any attack by Israel or the US.
What kind of processes are at play now to try and de-escalate this?
Well, as you're hearing from the US, they're desperately trying to temper this. Part of my analysis goes back to why would Israel do the attack in the first place? Because it seems escalatory. Now, you can come to all sorts of agendas about that. But if you link up, Israel's moved its forces out of Rafah, and therefore, is that to give them a pause? Is that because President Biden said stop fighting? Or is it there are large bodies within the Israeli government who say we don't just need to deal with Hamas, we need to deal with Hezbollah? And actually, by attacking Iran, the danger is that a subsequent retaliation would end up being the trigger, the catalyst for Israel to be able to go in against Hezbollah. That's the big worry, and I think that's what the US are trying desperately to avoid happening.
So for people waking up this morning or having breakfast and watching the instability unravelling, how concerned should people be in this country as to what is going on in the Middle East and how involved we are, the Americans are, and what happens next?
The trouble is we in the media do make a big thing of this, and it's not just about this, it's also about Ukraine. I have to say, from a measured perspective, if you look at the last time Hezbollah mounted a fairly significant attack, we were talking about potential escalation. It didn't happen. And it didn't happen because none of the major parties actually wanted to make it happen. The very fact is that Israel attacked this Iranian general largely because the dark shadow of Iran is behind all of these attacks by Hamas. It's behind Hezbollah, and it's around the Houthis attacking in the Red Sea. And therefore, in a way, it's saying, we know you're there, we know you're behind this, and we're going to sort you out. I don't think we can read it into risk of escalation. Of course, there's a risk. Ask me if I think that that's likely to escalate. I don't think that's likely. I think none of the parties, it suits them to escalate.
The backdrop of this, and David, talking about from our perspective, we're going to hear from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, a little bit later on today, setting out his stall for defence spending. He's saying, look, I want to match the Conservatives and say 2.5% if they can do it based on some other spending commitments. Do you think that's the right decision?
Bluntly, I'm a taxpayer like you are in this country. I'm a former military guy. I'd like more money. Of course I would. The trouble is the cheap way out for all the politicians is just to throw more money at it. And unfortunately, we live in a country where we've got a massive overdraft. I'm not sure that's the right answer. One of the things I'd want to see is actually a commitment to make sure only 11 of the NATO countries pay their way. of the 32, the rest, the vast majority do
so
not.
So this is above the 2%.
Yeah,
Only 11 of those
so
countries.
why on earth wouldn't we be applying pressure through NATO to make sure other countries...
Make them boost the bank balance cumulatively?
Yeah, because
of
that
course.
provides much better for it. Are there smarter ways?
And when you look at many of those European countries, they don't actually contribute the amount that they should be doing. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, is saying we're in a pre-war era. Surely that is a very salutary warning.
It is, but I think that's where I would much rather see our politicians not talking about Keir Starmer like the government at some stage in the future will spend 2.5%. What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to actually start doing today? And it feels like NATO is one of the ways, and there are ways to spend money in defence a lot smarter. We haven't got time to go into it now, but we do tend to focus on ships, tanks and aeroplanes. There are lots of other ways we could spend money a lot smarter.
This has been so fascinating. Thank you for a very sort of moderate look at what's actually going on and the implications it has for us. Sean Bell, thank you so much.